What's Notion's biggest problem right now? The lack of granular database views. If you know me, then you know that I absolutely love Notion. It's an amazing app and I use it for pretty much anything. But having worked with a lot of companies and startups and teams to build their workspaces, I know that one of the most pressing pain points when it comes to using Notion in these situations is the lack of granular database permissions. Right now, you can't take your database and just share certain entries, right? You just can't put certain properties or certain rows in your database and show them with a certain person. If you want to give them access to any entry, you have to give them access to all entries at once, at least if you want to do it in a scalable way and not like click into every item and add it to the other person. Now, that's not great, but there is a workaround. The workaround that I'm going to share with you is super simple to set up, it's highly customizable, and you can build it completely for free. It's really amazing, it's a huge game changer and will allow you to build a lot more complex workspaces for like really cool use cases before Notion finally starts shipping this much anticipated update. So let's have a look at this workaround, shall we?
The premise of our workaround couldn't be simpler. If Notion doesn't allow us to set granular settings on a database level to only share a specific subset of information, right, like only certain entries or certain properties with a specific group of people, well, then we can simply create several databases. Now, of course, we don't want to fully split our data, right? If we need to create a separate database for every use case, say we have a client, right? And instead of having all our tasks in one master task database, we now create 10 databases, one for each client, and then we have to populate them with the task, and we have no way of seeing all our tasks at once. Well, that's not very good. So what do? Well, we create one master database for all of our information, and then we will use an automation to automatically push the relevant information from one general private database into various public databases. And that way we have full control over our information, right? We have everything in one place for us or for people with the highest level of access. And then we can create as many granular conditions for certain situations, right? For different clients, for different employee levels, all of these things, and then only send out the relevant information. Again, this works to both only show certain entries of your database and to only show certain properties. So let's build this. We're going to start here in Notion with a very simple backend. I'm going to explain everything with a simple example, but this should be enough for you to understand the principles and then take it and apply it to whatever complex use case you're looking at. So let's create quickly one database for our private information. So private database, this will be the master database that contains everything, and then a second database that is public or shared with a specific subgroup, right? Maybe a client, maybe a certain group of employees that contains only the information that we want to share with them. And then let's just set up some very simple properties. So let's get like a sample description just to show how you can send properties. We of course need to mirror this here. Then some secret stuff that will only be in here, right? So also show you that we can only send then certain certain properties. And then we need to always have two backend properties that help us run the system reliably. The first one will be a formula property, and it's going to get us the ID for the database. And if you don't know, Notion since a while has had this new formula command ID that gives you the actual ID of the block or page entry in your database. And not just that, we also want a second one for to store the corresponding ID, right? So if we send it somewhere, like synced it to a different database, we want to store that information as well. And then let's set it up here as well. So we will get a formula for the ID. ID. And then we will get a corresponding ID field next to it. Corresponding ID. Okay, that's all for the Notion backend. Of course, you can make this a lot more complex, right? You can have a lot more information in there, but for the simple example, this will be more than enough. Actually, one thing is still missing. We need to check, right, or you need to have some way of telling the database whether or not it should be synced. So in this case, let's do it with a simple checkbox. But again, if you have like more than one database that you push it to, or like, several groups of employees, you could do just the same with like a select or any other sort of mechanism that you want to. And then let's add some entries. So we have like entry A, not secret, entry B, very secret, on entry C, not secret. Okay. And then for sample description, something interesting we want to share. And then this should be secret. And we can just actually repeat this over the others as well. Oops. For the very secret one, we don't need to have anything. And here, let's say more stuff and more secrets. Great. Good. So now the Notion part is done for sure. And now it's time to set up the automation that will automatically push information into the other database and sync it both ways. Also, just as a quick side note, if you don't want to build this, either the backend or the automation or both, then check out the video description. In there, I've linked the free template. You can just go there, download it, and then plug and play, and it should work right away with just a very few setup tweak steps. And yeah, in there you also will find a written blog post. So if you'd rather read through the steps, then there you go. Now the tool that we're going to use for these automations is called Make. And Make is a really, really powerful automation tool that has a great offer. They have one of the most advanced automations builders out there. It's, in my opinion, a lot more powerful than something like Zapier. And it has a really great free plan. The price plans are also much more affordable, but the free plan is already enough to build this. So if you don't have an account there yet, go ahead, go check out the description, make an account, and then let's continue. Once you're logged into Make, you can click on this big create a new scenario button, and that will open up your automation. We can give it a name. So this will be our sync information from private to public, something like that, because we need a second automation later to do the other way around to create true two-way sync. And then the first thing you want to do is click on the button, type in Notion, and look for the Notion module. In there, we want to pick the Watch Database Items option. Now, if you've never used Notion before, then up here you won't see any options for connections. So in that case, click on the Add button and authorize Make to access Notion. Then, once you've authorized Make, go back to your Notion workspace. You need to do that also if you've already authorized it. Click on the three dots and make sure that the page where you're building this is shared with the automation. You see it here under connections. If it's already added, then you will see there. Otherwise, you need to go and add connections. You're going to look for Make. For me, it's still labeled Integromat because it was the old name. So I'm going to click on it and confirm. And now we can actually work with this in Make. So then we can go back here, and then we want to set up the module. Now, for this module, the first thing you need to decide is, well, which items should it check out in this database? Only the ones that are newly created, or everything that got updated? We want to pick updated because, right, we might just change something. We don't want to just push fresh items. We want to push anything that changed. So we click on by updated time. Then we look for the actual database. We can do that by pressing search and then typing in the name. So, oops, actually I need to go into the other workspace, the sandbox. And the query is still private, and that should pull in, see, oops, no matches found. What do we call it? Private database. No, that should be fine. So let's see, private. Try again. Oops. Okay. Make sure we have the sandbox and we have it shared, so it should work. One last try. Sometimes you just need to refresh the page. So I'm going to move myself over there. Save this. Save anyway, and then quickly refresh the page. So let's see whether we're more successful now. Switch to our sandbox. Search for private. I don't think caps matters, but let's make sure. And there we go. Now it works. Let's flip back to update time. And then for the limit, you want to set this limit high enough so that it captures all potential changes, right? So if you have, I don't know, 100 or like thousands of items in your database, and you between intervals, right, between when you schedule this automation, you usually update like 20 to 30, then set it to 50 or so, something high enough that it captures for sure everything. We don't have a lot of entries, so 5 is enough. And then just click on OK. And then choose where to start. We want to get everything, so we want to get the old entries as well. Click on OK, and then right-click it and say Run Once to pull in the information and see how it looks. You can click on here and see that it actually pulled in bundle 1, bundle 2, bundle 3, all 3 entries. Oops, that was the wrong one, from our database here. So now we can start working with that. Now, next up in our scenario, we need to add something that's called a router. And a router allows us to define different paths for the automation to take, depending on what's the situation. And that's very applicable here, right? Because if we think about it, what could have happened when we create a new entry, right? The first thing that could be possible is if we have something that has changed is that we have a completely new entry in our database that we haven't synced to the other database. That's option A. Option B is that we already have an entry in the other one, right? We already synced it once, but we changed something, so now we want to reflect the change. And the third option is that we decide that we don't want to share this item any longer, and then we want to remove it from the other database. So we have 3 different options, and we want to make sure that all of them are applied here. So let's click on this button, and then let's click on Router. We wait for a second for now, it will be below Flow Control, and then we have the router here. By default, we have 2 options. We can click again, then we have all 3 options. Now, let's set up the easy one first. We have a new entry and we want to sync it. So for that, all we need to do is we need to say, okay, Notion, please create a database item in the public one or wherever you want to sync it to, right? So let's search for public, click OK, wait for a second, and then we have the public database. That should be it. And now we can map the information. So as you see here, we have now name, corresponding ID, and sample description. We don't have the secret part, right? Where was it here? We don't have the secret stuff in here, so there's nothing to map there, but all the other ones we want to quickly map. So we click in there, and then it pulls up the information from the previous module, so everything it captured here. And then under property values, we can see, well, where is it? It's name. So we open up name, and then we want to get the plain text. For the corresponding ID, we want to get the ID, right? So the corresponding ID is always the ID from the other place. And then for the sample description, again, sometimes it decides to bug a little bit. Sample description, we need to turn on map, sorry, so that we can actually pull it in. And then there we get the sample description from here. Again, also plain text. Okay, that was part 1. And then the second thing that we want to do is once we created that entry, we want to reflect in the initial database that it now has a synced object somewhere else, right? So for that, we create and add another module, another Notion module. And this one time we want to update a database item. And what we want to do is we want to make sure that here we have also that ID of the entry that was created there, right? During the mapping step, we already said, okay, set this corresponding ID to this field. And here we want to do the opposite. We want to set this field to this field. And we do that by using the updated database item module, picking again our private database, and then just mapping the information from here. So we say, okay, which database item do you want to update? Well, we want to update the initial one, so this one. And we don't want to change anything for name or description. We just want to make sure that the corresponding ID is set to the ID value here. So we open this up and we take the ID value here. And we click on OK. And we are nearly good to go for the first part. Because now we also need to define, well, when should it actually take this route? Well, so we click on here to add our filter. And there are 2 conditions. So first, let's give it a label. So it will be new entry. The first condition is that we actually want to sync this, right? Because only when sync is set to true do we want to push it. If sync is not set to true, we don't want the information in the other database. So we say sync, And then we need to change the operator from text to Boolean, because the checkbox is a Boolean, equal to, and then we look for the true operator that's in the second column here, second option field, and then true. That's the first part. And the second part of the condition is that we haven't synced this yet, right? That this does not exist yet. And we can do that by saying, okay, the corresponding ID should be empty, right? Because if it hasn't synced yet, this will be empty. So we can just say, well, this should not exist. Does not exist. Okay. And now if we go in our database and we actually say, okay, entry A, not so secret, we want to sync this, and entry C, we want to sync this, and click on run once, it should ideally be pushed to the database. So let's see what happens. 1 and 2, that looks good. We go back, and there we go. We now pushed our entries from here to there. And as one thing that I've seen, a mistake that I made, I set up the property wrong. It's still like a multi-select, that's why it behaved also so weird before. So we flip this to text. Now it works perfectly. And now we have like our entry A and our entry C in there, but not our entry B. And we also only have the property in there that we wanted to sync, right? Not the secret stuff, only the sample description. So the first, easiest, just push it into the other database thing already works. Now we want to make sure that we can also update information if it changes, right? If we say, if we change the description here or the name of it, it should reflect here. So for that, we're going to use our second route. So in this case, the first thing that we need to do is again set up the condition. When should it go through here? Well, the condition is that updated record. The first condition is that, again, it is set to sync, right? Because remember, if it should not sync, then it should not take this route. So sync should, again, be equal to true. And then the second condition in this case is that it has already a counterpart. Because remember, this one will only pull in the entry at all if it has been updated. So we already know there has been a change. And now we want to just make sure that we only that we update it if we have already something corresponding. So in this case, we go again to corresponding ID. That plain text exists. So it's basically the opposite of this one. If it doesn't exist, go here. If it exists, please go here. That's step one. Step two is to find that entry in the other database. So we click here, say Notion, and then we want to search objects. And we want to search in the database, in the public one, for the record that corresponds to whatever we have here. So in order to do that, we will set again our filter condition and we will say, okay, well, search wherever the corresponding ID in the new field maps to the ID of the entry, or the other way around, right? You could also map ID to corresponding ID, either way. One of the correspondings to the IDs, just the other way around. And if you do this, like a corresponding ID should be, and then equal to, should be equal to, and then we move this over here and say it should be equal to the ID that we just found. Please return this. It should only be one value, right? Not 10. So you can set this to 1. And then it should pull that in. We can actually test whether that works by heading over to our database and grabbing one corresponding ID it is that we're looking for, right? So we say, let's take this here, copy it, right-click this and say run this module only, and it asks us then to input the ID that we look for. Let's see whether it found something. Yes, it found an entry. Awesome. And then we want to update that entry. So we click again on add another module, Notion, update a database item, add again the public database. Which item should it update? Well, it should update the one that it just found, right? So we pick this one. And you see, now you have several Notion things in there, but whenever you hover over information, it will pulsate for the one that you're pulling in data, right? So if I am over the database item ID here, it's the wrong one. If I'm over here, it's the right one from the previous module. So I click on there, And then we just map the fields again to this, right? So we just make sure that it's set to the correct new version. So name should again be whatever the current name is. Sample description should be whatever the current sample description is, and the ID doesn't change, so we don't need to modify that. Let's click on OK, and let's see again whether it works. Let's say we have now entry A plus some changes, and then for entry C, more stuff that we forgot to add earlier, so now we do it later. Okay, so we have two changes, one in the title, one in the actual text, and they're both still set to sync. So if we run our database, our automation now, this change should reflect if we set everything up correctly. Looks good, the first one is already through. Now the second one, okay, let's go over here and see, well, entry A, not so secret plus some changes, and entry C, more stuff that we forgot to add earlier, so now we do it later. Awesome, so now we can change anything in our private database, right? This is the one that we want to work in. We want to have all the information, we want to see everything at once, but the stuff that we push then into the public database, well, we can easily change something here and it will reflect here correctly. That means there's only one thing left to do for this first part of the automation, and that's to make sure that if we say, if we remove a sync here, it gets removed here, right? If we say, oh, well, entry C is actually secret now, let's remove it. I want to remove it from here. How do we do that? Well, with our third one. And again, let's set up the filter first. And this time, removed entry. We have, again, two conditions. The first condition is that sync is set to false now, right? It not equal to, or like, let's make it easier, like equal to, and then false. That's the first condition. And the second condition is that it was synced before. And remember, when is that the case? Well, that's the case if we have a corresponding ID. So we take the corresponding ID and this one should exist. So if these two things are the case, then we need to remove the entry. And again, how do we do that? First, we will search for the object. So we will just add the same thing here again. Search objects, go into the public database, please, and search for the entry that has a matching corresponding ID. Corresponding ID equals our ID here. Return that. Can I click this? Yes. Okay. And then the second thing, a bit confusing. There's no delete database entry, right? We only have create, but the delete page content actually does the same thing if we put in the ID of the page and not of a block. So page ID content, we just pick the information we just pulled up here. So this page ID, and that means it will remove that one. Okay, let's move myself over here again. Save quickly our work so it doesn't get lost. And then let's unsync something. So entry C, well, actually, now that I think about it, this is not for everyone's eyes. So let's remove it. Let's run it. And let's see what happens. That looks good. And now we see it's gone. So now you've set up already the most important part. You have complete one-way sync. Everything that changes in your private database will correctly update in the public database. So if you have a situation where you just want to show a client, right, these are the tasks that I'm working on, have a look, that's already enough. Or if you're in a situation where you work with clients and want to give them access to certain resources, right? You could have a list of your resources in here, and if someone bought something or if you want to give them access to, you just click on sync, then it pushes it there. And if you want to change something, right, if you want to upload something else, you can make these changes. And if like later, maybe their membership ends, right, and you unsync, you can do that and it gets removed. Complete one-way sync. Now, what's still missing is the two-way sync. What if you also want to enable the person on the other side to make changes, right? Maybe you're working with your employees and these are tasks for them and they want to change the status, right? Maybe they've worked on this now and they've completed it and you want to reflect that change in here. Well, that's the second part that we're going to look at right now. So very quickly, we need to fix one thing with the automation, and that is when we delete the page content, we need to also make sure that we clear out the corresponding ID, right? That's still wrong. The entry C does not exist anymore, so it should not have a corresponding ID here. So we go in here and say, well, as the last action, please make sure that we update a database item from the private area. And let's set the corresponding ID to nothing. So corresponding ID should be null. That should work. Let's see whether it's null or erase. Sometimes get confused by these. And which one do we want to update? Well, we want to update the very first one, right? The one that we were working with in the beginning. So let's see whether that works. Let's go here and say, okay, here we can quickly delete this manually. And then let's say, okay, entry A, not some changes. We want to unsync this. Go over here and run this once. Oops. Have the rich text. Yes, that was the where we changed the rich text from the module before. So we just need to quickly go and remember we had like here. It used to be our tags, and I just changed it. So then we need to quickly make sure it's set up again correctly. Cool. Choose where to start to make sure that we get all the entries again. Okay. Run again and see whether that works now. Well, this looks good. So I created one and I deleted one. So we have now the entry C that got pushed again. That was correct. And entry A got deleted. And we also don't have a corresponding ID in here anymore. So worked perfectly. Now that part is really done. So on to the slight modification that we need to do to our backend here in order for the two-way sync to work. It's very easy and has to do with the issue that for the other automation that we're going to build, we can't just add this watch for database, for updated database items module, right? Because by definition, whenever we push an entry from our initial database to the public database, this one, well, it will be updated. So the other one would also find this entry, see, well, it has been updated, so let's push changes back here again. And then we would have something that was here updated again and would like start a circle over. So we would have created a loop that uses up a lot of our automations, and we don't want that. So to make sure that we only trigger the two-way sync if the user made a change here, we just can add two simple properties. The first one will be last edited by. And as you can see, it shows Integromat, or in your case, it should show make, because that's the new name of the integration. So I know now, okay, this was not a user update. Awesome. And then I can just check with the formula to make it a bit easier when we build the automation in a second, whether it's a user or not. So let's call this user update question mark. And the formula will be if last edited by does not equal, exclamation mark and an equal sign. And then in quotation marks, I write Integromat, you should write make, if that's the name of your integration. And then we can click on done. And we see, well, it's not checked right. The user did not update this, but if I now go in here, say entry C, with some stuff that the user changed, we see, well, last added by me. So great, that works. And now we can build the second part of our two-way sync automation. Okay, let's head back to make, create a new scenario, and add a Notion module. And this time you could use the watch database items one and just set a filter for user update, but it's actually more efficient if we use search objects, because that will only return the ones that are relevant, and we save a few but sometimes meaningful operations from our account. So switch again to the right Notion connection and search database items and put in the public database. Yes, this one, make sure that the limit is high enough for whatever potential changes are there, and then set a filter to user update. And then for under the formula ones, checkbox equals, and then true. So only where that is the case. Please only search for those. And then we click on OK. And sometimes we need to click on OK twice for whatever reason. And then the red thing will disappear and we can actually run this module only. And it should pull in the one object where we did our user change. Great. So now what we're going to do is we will search the other module. We will go to Notion and we will search again for objects in our private database. private. And we will make sure that we again search that the corresponding ID in the private database matches our ID in the public database. Again, limit can here be 1. Oops. Okay. And now what we should get is it should find, if we run everything together, it will still find the user update, and then it will find in the other one, the one with the old entry in there. Great. And now we just need to update it again. So again, click on plus, say Notion, and then update a database item. And we want to update in the private database. Which item? Well, the one that we just found in the previous step. And we want to make sure that the name equals now whatever the new name in this thing is, and the sample description, whatever the new thing in there is. And now, of course, you could go more granular, right? And if you only want to allow for certain edits, if you say, well, if they change the status, please reflect that. But if they change the name, don't change that, then stop mapping or don't map these things, right? And it will properly work. We can do that. And then let's click on OK. And now, if we, move myself again over there again. If we run it, what should happen is that it should change the thing in the initial database, right? So let's have a look at it, how it is. Entry C with some stuff that the user changed. That's not reflected here. But once we run this, it should. So let's see. Yes, with some stuff that the user changed. Great. So that works. And the last thing now that we need to do is we need to make sure that here we somehow record that we changed this, right? And we have two options. We can either can have the system make a very minor change, right? Like add a space to the sample description here. That would be enough. Or we just add another checkbox and say checkbox pushed update. And then, although, that won't work probably. Let's do the space version. Otherwise, we need to do a bit more logic. So what we're going to do is we're going to click on here, add another module, again, Notion, update a database item. And now we're going to update in the public one, right? Get the public database. Get the one that we just found here in the beginning. Page ID. And then let's say in the sample description, please, we can like keep the existing sample description, right? We can keep that, but just like add a space at the end, right? Won't be visible to us as the users, but it will be a systems change. So if we run this now again, it will again like try to push a change to here that doesn't exist, right? It will just like do it again, and then it should add like a space here so that the last edited by flips back to integral mat or make. So let's run it another time, and there we see it's now integral mat and won't be pulled in again. So if I now run it a third time, you see nothing happens because nothing exists here, right? We didn't find anything. And in order to make sure that in these scenarios we don't get like an error and the automation stops, we will right click it and say add error handler. If that's the case, just ignore this, right? If something goes wrong here, then just ignore that. We save and we can align. And now if we run this again, it will just go there and then not do anything as we intended to do. But now we have our true two-way sync. We can change something in here and we'll push back to the private database. We can change something here and it will push to the public database. So all that's left is to make sure that we schedule these automations in whatever cadence we want them to run, and then we are done. Now, how exactly you schedule will depend a bit on your needs. If this is something that you need like a lot of real-time updates, right, and you need to schedule it in a very tight schedule. If it's more something where you push occasionally things to like a public database, then once a day is probably more than enough. The one thing that I would say is fairly important is that you make sure that you schedule the first automation, this one, to go off before the second automation. Because in case there's a conflict, right, in case we have like a user changed something here, and we change something there, we probably want to make sure that the private database overwrites the other change. That's of course a very advanced problem with two-way sync, right? How do you handle differences? You could of course make it more complex, right? You could add like a buffer database and then like make sure that like you can like vote or something on which change should reflect. But let's keep it simple here and just make sure that the private database always takes priority. And we do that simply by going in here and saying, okay, we want to run this. Let's say we turn on scheduling and we want to run this not every 15 minutes, but we want to run it once a day. So every day. We want to run it every day, let's say at night, so at 4 a.m. in the morning. And then we go to the other database and we schedule this as well. And we schedule it to simply run a little bit later. So again, once every day, but this one will run at 5 a.m. And that makes sure that first we push changes from the private database to public. And then if there are like any other things left in public that were changed there, then only do we push it back. And that's it. Now your two-way sync granular Notion views are ready for whatever you need them for. So there you have it. You just solved one of Notion's biggest remaining problems. Congratulations. Of course, if you have any questions about this method or potential modifications, feel free to ask them in the comments. I'll be sure to answer every single one of them. Also, if you like this video, I would really appreciate a thumbs up. And if you want to learn more about Notion automations and all these super cool automations and workarounds that you can use to make everything a lot more powerful, then be sure to follow this channel. I will see you in the next video. Bye.